Sure, I'll rewrite the first part in English for an American audience in a style that fits Reddit storytelling vibes for a YouTube narration. Here's the translation and adaptation of Part 1 into English, keeping it engaging and around 10,000 characters. Let's dive in. Part 1. The Spark Ignites Picture. A sweltering summer day in a small southern town, let's say somewhere in Georgia, where the air's so thick with humidity it feels like you're swimming through it. The sun's baking the asphalt, and ancient oaks draped in Spanish moss cast patchy shadows over cracked sidewalks. This is Greenwood, a sleepy little place where time seems to move slower, but the past lingers like a stubborn ghost. Living here is Jacob Williams, a 34-year-old black man with a lean build, close-cropped hair, and eyes that have seen more than they'd care to admit. Jacob grew up in Greenwood, knows every alley and every whispered story behind its faded storefronts. But today, July 15th, 2023, he's about to face something that'll push him into a fight, not just for himself, but for everyone who's ever been kicked down by this town. Jacob wasn't some loudmouth activist or troublemaker. He worked as a mechanic at a local garage, fixing beat-up pickup trucks, while the radio churned out country tunes mixed with sermons from overzealous preachers. He lived alone in a cramped apartment on the edge of town ever since his wife, Layla, left him 3 years back, taking their daughter, Emily, to Atlanta. His life was quiet, predictable, but there was always this ember burning inside him, a nagging feeling that the world around him wasn't quite right. He felt it every time Sheriff Thompson pulled him over for no reason, or when the cashier at the corner store trailed him like he was about to pocket a candy bar. He swallowed it down, though, because in Greenwood, you survive by keeping your head low. That day started with a phone call. His old buddy Trevor, who worked at the Greenwood Hope homeless shelter, rang him up with good news. "Jacob, we've got a spot. That guy you've been vouching for can come in today. I cleared it with the boss. Everything's set." Jacob let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. For weeks, he'd been trying to get a bed for his cousin Marcus, who'd just rolled back into town after 5 years in prison. Marcus had done time for petty theft, swiped a couple of beers from a gas station at 19, but the judge wanted to teach him a lesson, and that lesson stretched into half a decade. Now 24, Marcus was homeless, jobless, and hopeless, crashing in an abandoned shed on the outskirts. Jacob knew the shelter could be his lifeline. He told Marcus to meet him at Greenwood Hope at 3 p.m. Jacob rolled up in his rusty old Ford, just to make sure everything went smooth. The shelter was a squat building with peeling paint and a neon sign that buzzed like it was on its last legs. He parked and waited, watching Marcus shuffle up, skinny, in a torn t-shirt, with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. They hugged, and Jacob felt some of the tension in his chest ease up. "It's gonna be all right, man," he said, clapping Marcus on the back. Together, they walked up to the door. But the second they stepped inside, the vibe shifted. Behind the counter stood Mary Ann Crawford, the shelter's administrator, a middle-aged woman with a face like a clenched fist and lips pressed into a thin line. She glanced at Marcus, then at Jacob, and something cold flickered in her eyes. "Sorry, we don't have any openings," she said, not even bothering to check her clipboard. Jacob frowned. "What do you mean, no openings? I just got a call saying there's a spot." Mary Ann crossed her arms. "Things changed. We're full. He can't stay." Her voice cut like a knife. Jacob felt heat creeping up his neck. He knew that tone, that look. It wasn't the first time he'd been brushed off because of the color of his skin. But this time, it was about Marcus. Someone who'd already lost everything. "That's not true," he said, fighting to keep his voice steady. I talked to Trevor. He said there's a bed. What's going on here? Mary Ann shrugged like it was none of her business. I've got nothing else to say. You need to leave. Marcus dropped his head, his shoulders slumping. Jacob could see the hope draining out of his cousin's eyes, and it tore him up inside. But he wasn't backing down. No, he said firmly. We're not leaving until you tell us why you're denying him a spot. You got rules? Let me see 'em. Mary Ann rolled her eyes and turned away, signaling for the security guard. A hulking white guy named Bill who looked like he'd walked straight out of a Jim Bro meme. You heard her? Bill rumbled, stepping between Jacob and the counter. Time to go. Jacob raised his hands, trying to stay calm. We just want to know why. He's got a right to be here. But Bill wasn't hearing it. He grabbed Marcus by the arm and yanked him toward the door. Marcus pulled back instinctively. And that's when it all went sideways. Bill shoved him hard, too hard, and Marcus hit the floor, smacking his head on the concrete. Jacob lunged to help, but Bill grabbed him by the collar and hauled him outside, right alongside Marcus. A small crowd had gathered on the street, passers-by rubbernecking the drama. Jacob helped Marcus up, noticing blood trickling from his temple. You okay? He asked, but Marcus just shook his head, his eyes hollow. And then came the sound of sirens. Someone had called the cops. Within minutes, a patrol car screeched up. Out stepped Officer Dylan Cook, young, white, with a strut that screamed overconfidence. What's going on here? He asked, hand resting on his holster. Jacob explained it all, keeping his cool. How they'd been denied a bed. How the guard had attacked Marcus. But Cook didn't seem to listen. He looked at Marcus, at the blood on his face, and his tone shifted. Hands behind your back, he barked at Marcus. For what? Jacob snapped. He didn't do anything. But Cook was already pulling out handcuffs. He was resisting, the officer said, even though Marcus hadn't raised his voice once. Jacob felt the world shrink to this moment, to the injustice unfolding right in front of him. He stepped forward to argue, but Cook wheeled on him with a look that stopped him cold. Don't do anything stupid, the cop said quietly, his voice dripping with menace. Marcus was shoved into the back of the patrol car, and Jacob stood there on the sidewalk, watching his cousin get hauled away. He knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a fight that would change everything. Got it. I'll write Part 2 in English, making it significantly longer than Part 1, aiming for around 20,000 characters to give you a meaty chunk of the story. It'll pick up right where we left off, diving deeper into the escalating conflict, introducing new characters, and building the stakes for Jacob and Marcus. Here we go. Part 2. The fight takes shape. The patrol car's taillights disappeared around the corner, leaving Jacob standing on the cracked sidewalk outside Greenwood Hope. The crowd lingered for a moment, whispering among themselves, but soon drifted away, leaving only the hum of cicadas and the distant buzz of the shelter's neon sign. Jacob's hands were balled into fists, his nails digging into his palms hard enough to draw blood. He could still hear Marcus's quiet grunt as Officer Cook slammed him against the car, still see the blank resignation on his cousin's face as the cuffs clicked shut. This wasn't just another day in Greenwood. This was a line crossed, and Jacob wasn't about to let it slide. He pulled out his phone and dialed Trevor, his fingers shaking as he pressed the screen. It rang twice before his friend picked up. Jacob, what the hell happened? I just got back from the storage room and heard there was a scene. Jacob took a deep breath, forcing the words out. They wouldn't let Marcus in. That woman, Mary Ann, said there's no space, even though you told me it was set. Then the guard roughed him up, and the cops took him away. They're saying he resisted, Trev. He didn't do a damn thing. There was a long pause on the other end, followed by a low curse. Man, I'm so sorry. I don't know what's going on with her. She's been on edge lately. But this is messed up. Where's Marcus now? Jail, I guess, Jacob said, his voice tight. I'm heading there. Can you find out what's up with Marianne, why she pulled this? Trevor promised to dig into it and hung up. Jacob climbed into his truck, the engine sputtering to life as he peeled out toward the Greenwood police station. His mind was racing, anger, fear, and a growing resolve churning together. He'd spent his whole life dodging the system's sharp edges, but now it had cut too deep. Marcus didn't deserve this. Nobody did. The station was a squat brick building downtown, its faded American flag drooping in the heat. Jacob parked crookedly and stormed inside, the air conditioning hitting him like a slap. At the front desk sat Deputy Linda Hayes, a middle-aged white woman with a perm and a bored expression. She barely looked up from her crossword puzzle as he approached. I'm here about Marcus Williams, Jacob said, leaning on the counter. He was just brought in. What's the charge? Linda sighed, flipping through a logbook with all the enthusiasm of a sloth. Williams, huh? Yeah, he's here. Disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. Bail's set at $500. You got cash? Jacob's jaw tightened. Disorderly conduct? He didn't do anything but get shoved around. I was there. I saw it. Where's Officer Cook? I want to talk to him. Linda finally looked up, her eyes narrowing. Cook's out on patrol. And I don't care what you saw, hun. That's what the report says. You want to get him out? It's $500. Otherwise, he sits till his hearing. Next Monday. Jacob didn't have $500 lying around. His last paycheck had gone to rent and a busted alternator for a customer's car. He stepped back, running a hand over his face. Can I at least see him? Linda shrugged. 10 minutes. Follow me. She led him through a heavy steel door to a holding area, a row of cells that smelled like bleach and despair. Marcus was in the last one, sitting on a metal bench with his head in his hands. A bandage covered the cut on his temple, but blood had seeped through, staining it red. He looked up as Jacob approached, his expression a mix of exhaustion and shame. I'm sorry, man, Marcus muttered. I didn't mean for this. Jacob gripped the bars, his voice low but fierce. This ain't your fault. None of it. I'm getting you out of here, all right? Just hang on. Marcus nodded weakly, but Jacob could tell he didn't believe it. Back outside, Jacob sat in his truck, staring at the station. He couldn't scrape together $500 by Monday, not without selling something or begging for a loan. But he wasn't about to let Marcus rot in there. He needed help, and he knew exactly who to call. Aisha Carter. Aisha was a paralegal who'd grown up 2 streets over from him, a sharp-tongued woman with a law degree she couldn't afford to finish, and a fire for justice that never dimmed. She worked at a small legal aid clinic in town, taking on cases the big shots wouldn't touch. If anyone could figure this out, it was her. He drove to the clinic, a storefront wedged between a pawn shop and a laundromat. Aisha was at her desk, surrounded by stacks of files, her braids pulled back in a tight bun. She looked up as he walked in, raising an eyebrow. Jacob Williams, as I live and breathe. What's got you looking like you're about to punch a wall? He told her everything, the shelter, the guard, the arrest, watching her face harden with every word. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her lips. So, Marianne Crawford's playing gatekeeper, huh? And Cook's out here flexing like he's judge and jury. Typical Greenwood bullshit. All right, here's the deal. Marcus has a shot at getting this tossed, but we need evidence. Witnesses, footage, Something. Did anyone record it? Jacob shook his head. I don't know. There were people around, but I didn't see phones out. Aisha nodded, already scribbling notes. I'll check with Trevor, see if the shelter's got cameras. And I'll pull Cook's record. That guy's got a history of resisting arrest charges that magically disappear when the right lawyer shows up. We can start there. Bail's trickier, though. You got anything to sell? Jacob thought of his tools, his livelihood, but nodded. I'll figure it out. Aisha agreed to take the case pro bono, but she warned him. This ain't gonna be quick or easy. Greenwood's old guard doesn't like being challenged, especially not by folks like us. Jacob met her gaze. I don't care. They don't get to do this to him. She smirked. Good. Then let's get to work. The next few days were a blur. Jacob pawned his best wrench set for $300 and borrowed the rest from a coworker, scraping together the bail money by Sunday night. He got Marcus out Monday morning, just before the hearing. Marcus looked worse, pale, quiet, like jail had sucked out what little fight he had left. They didn't talk much on the drive back to Jacob's place. Marcus just stared out the window, rubbing his wrists where the cuffs had been. Meanwhile, Aisha was digging. She called Jacob that afternoon with news. Trevor says there's a security camera outside the shelter, but Mary Ann's claiming it's broken. Convenient, right? I'm pushing for the footage anyway. Filed a request with the shelter's board. And get this. Cook's been named in 3 excessive force complaints in the last 2 years. All settled out of court. He's dirty, Jacob, but he's protected. Jacob gripped the phone tighter. So, what do we do? Aisha's voice was steel. We build a case, find witnesses, make noise. This isn't just about Marcus anymore. It's about all of them pulling this crap. That night, Jacob couldn't sleep. He sat on his couch, a warm beer in hand, replaying the scene at the shelter over and over. Then his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Meet me at the diner on 5th. Midnight. I saw what happened. His heart raced. A witness? He grabbed his keys and headed out. The diner was a 24-hour joint with flickering lights and greasy tables. At a booth in the back sat a nervous-looking white kid, maybe 20, with a mop of brown hair and a hoodie pulled low. He waved Jacob over. You're the guy from the shelter, right? With the dude they arrested? Jacob slid into the seat. Yeah. Who are you? The kid glanced around, lowering his voice. Name's Ethan. I was across the street that day. Saw the whole thing. How that guard shoved your friend, how the cop twisted it. I got it on my phone. Video Jacob's breath caught. You serious? Ethan nodded, pulling out his phone and playing a shaky clip. There it was, Bill pushing Marcus, Cook cuffing him, all while Jacob yelled in the background. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. Why'd you record it? Jacob asked. Ethan shrugged. I don't know. Felt wrong. I've seen that cop mess with people before, usually black guys, sometimes Latinos. Figured someone should have proof. Jacob felt a surge of hope, but it was tempered by caution. Why tell me now? Ethan fidgeted. Heard you bailed him out. Thought you might actually do something with this. But listen, Cook's got buddies everywhere. If they know I've got this, I'm screwed. Jacob nodded. I'll keep you out of it. Can you send it to me? Ethan hesitated, then tapped his phone. A second later, Jacob's buzzed with the file. Back home, Jacob watched the video again. The timestamp burned into his brain. July 15th, 2023, 3:17 p.m. This was it, the crack in the wall. He forwarded it to Aisha with a message. We've got him. Her reply came fast. Holy shit. This changes everything. Meet me tomorrow, 8 a.m. We're filing a complaint against Cook and suing the shelter. Game on. As Jacob lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, he felt the ember inside him flare into a flame. This wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about every time he'd been followed in a store, every unwarranted traffic stop, every door slammed in his face. It was about Greenwood, and all the Mary Anns and cooks who thought they could keep people like him down. He didn't know how far this fight would take him, but he knew one thing. He wasn't stopping now. It looks like my previous response got cut off again. My apologies for that. It seems I hit a length limit mid-sentence. I'll finish part 3 here, picking up right where I left off, and make sure it reaches the full 25,000 characters as promised. I'll keep the momentum going and wrap up this part with a strong cliffhanger to lead into part 4. Let's dive back in. Part 3. The battle lines are drawn, completed. The next morning, Jacob woke up with the sun barely creeping over the horizon, his phone already buzzing with a text from Aisha. Clinic, 8 sharp. Bring coffee. This is war. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes, the weight of the previous night still pressing on his chest. That video from Ethan wasn't just evidence, it was a grenade, and they were about to pull the pin. He threw on a clean shirt, grabbed 2 cups of gas station coffee, and headed out, the early heat already sticking to his skin like a second shirt. The legal aid clinic was buzzing when he arrived. Aisha was at her desk, surrounded by a fortress of papers, her laptop open to a draft of a formal complaint. She looked up as he set the coffee down, her eyes glinting with something fierce. "Morning, soldier," she said, taking a sip. "You ready to shake this town up?" Jacob nodded, sliding the phone with Ethan's video across the table. "Let's do it." Aisha played the clip again, pausing it frame by frame, her pen scribbling notes like a machine gun firing. "This is gold," she muttered. "Assault by the guard, excessive force by Cook, and Mary Ann's lying ass in the background. We're hitting them with a civil suit against the shelter for discrimination and a formal complaint against the police department. Maybe even a federal angle if we can prove a pattern." Jacob leaned back, the scope of it sinking in like a stone in his gut. "Federal? You think it's that big?" Aisha smirked, her lips curling like she'd just drawn first blood. "Oh, it's bigger than you know. I pulled some strings last night. Talked to a friend at the ACLU in Atlanta. Cook's name's popped up on their radar before, and Greenwood Hope has a whisper of sketchy funding tied to some old money types who don't like certain folks getting help. We're not just fighting for Marcus here. We're cracking open a whole damn system." They spent the next hour hammering out the details. Aisha drafted a complaint alleging racial discrimination by the shelter under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, since they got federal grants, and a separate excessive force claim against Officer Cook under Section 1983 for violating Marcus's Fourth Amendment rights. Jacob watched her work, half in awe, half terrified. "You think we can win this?" he asked, his voice quieter than he meant it to be. Aisha didn't look up from her screen. "Winning's not the point yet. Making them sweat is. Once we file, it's public. People start talking. That's when the real fight begins." By noon, they were at the county courthouse, a crumbling relic with a Confederate statue out front that always made Jacob's stomach turn. Aisha marched up to the clerk's window, slapping down the paperwork with a grin that could cut glass. "Tell your boss Greenwood's about to get loud," she said to the wide-eyed clerk, a mousy white woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Jacob stood behind her, feeling the eyes of every person in the lobby. Mostly white, mostly staring. Word travels fast in a small town, and he knew this was just the spark. Sure enough, by that afternoon, the story was spreading like wildfire. Jacob got a call from Trevor while he was at the garage, elbow deep in a truck's engine, grease streaking his arms. "Man, it's chaos over here," Trevor said, his voice hushed like he was hiding from someone. "Mary Ann's freaking out. Locked herself in her office after someone leaked that you're suing. The board's pissed, and half the staff's ready to quit. What did you do?" Jacob wiped his hands on a rag, his jaw tight. "Just told the truth. You still got my back?" Trevor hesitated, the silence stretching too long. "Yeah, man. I'm digging for that camera footage. If it's there, I'll find it." Jacob thanked him and hung up, but the unease lingered. Trevor was a good guy, but he had a job to protect, and a family who'd feel the heat if this got too messy. That evening, Jacob took Marcus to a diner. Not the one where he'd met Ethan, but a quieter spot on the edge of town called Rosie's, with chipped formica tables and a jukebox that hadn't worked since the 90s. Marcus hadn't said much since getting out of jail, and Jacob wanted to check in. They sat in a booth, Marcus picking at a plate of fries, while Jacob nursed a Coke, the ice melting into a puddle. "You holding up?" Jacob asked, keeping his tone soft. Marcus shrugged, his voice barely above a whisper. "Feel like I'm still in that cell, you know? Like it don't matter what happens, they'll always find a way to lock me up again." Jacob reached across the table, gripping his cousin's shoulder hard enough to make him look up. "Not this time. We're fighting back. They don't get to win." Marcus met his eyes for the first time in days, a flicker of something, hope, maybe, crossing his face. "You really think we can?" Jacob nodded, his voice steady as steel. "I know we can, but the fight was about to get uglier." The next morning, Jacob woke to the sound of shattering glass. He bolted upright, heart hammering, and ran to the living room. A brick lay in the middle of his floor, surrounded by jagged shards, a note taped to it in jagged scrawl. "Back off, or you're next." His hands shook as he picked it up, the threat sinking into his bones. He called Aisha, who showed up 20 minutes later with a camera and a scowl that could melt steel. "This is Intimidation 101, she said, snapping photos of the mess. "They're scared. Means we're onto something." She filed a police report, ironically with Officer Cook's partner, a stone-faced guy named Reynolds, who took the statement like he was reading a grocery list. "We'll look into it," Reynolds said, his tone flat as the pavement outside. Jacob didn't believe him for a second. The brick was just the beginning. By midweek, the local paper, the Greenwood Gazette, ran a front-page story. "Local man sues shelter, alleges racism." It painted Jacob as a troublemaker, quoting Mary Ann claiming Marcus was aggressive and unfit for the shelter, with anonymous sources calling the lawsuit a money grab. Jacob's boss at the garage, a gruff white guy named Hank, with a beard like steel wool, pulled him aside that afternoon. "Look, I like you, kid," Hank said, scratching his neck. "But this is stirring up shit. Customers are asking questions. Some ain't coming back. I can't have drama here." Jacob stared at him, his stomach twisting. "You firing me?" Hank shook his head, but his eyes were hard. "Not yet. Just keep it low, all right?" Jacob didn't respond. Low wasn't an option anymore. Aisha, meanwhile, was relentless. She'd tracked down 2 more witnesses from the shelter incident. A Latina woman named Rosa, who'd been waiting for a food voucher, and an older black man, Mr. Jenkins, who'd been outside smoking when it all went down. Rosa told Aisha she'd seen Bill shove Marcus like he was trash, her voice trembling as she recounted it. Mr. Jenkins, a retired bus driver with a gravelly voice, said he'd watched Cook slap the cuffs on Marcus, faster than you can blink. Boy didn't even flinch, let alone resist. Both agreed to testify if it came to that, though Rosa admitted she was scared. Her husband worked for a local contractor tied to the same old money crowd Aisha had mentioned. The community was splitting down the middle. Some folks, mostly Black and Latino residents, started showing up at Jacob's apartment with quiet support. A casserole from Mrs. Carter down the street, a nod from the barber who'd known his dad. Others, though, turned cold. At the garage, a regular named Dale, a white guy with a Confederate flag sticker on his truck, muttered "troublemaker" under his breath as he paid for an oil change. Jacob heard it but kept his head down, his hands steady on the wrench. He couldn't afford to lose it. Not yet. Then came the rally. Aisha had tipped off a few activists she knew from Atlanta, and by Friday, a small crowd gathered outside the courthouse, maybe 50 people, holding signs that read, "Justice for Marcus" and "End police brutality." Jacob wasn't sure how to feel about it. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't wanted a spotlight, but Aisha insisted it was necessary. "Pressure's how we win," she said, handing him a megaphone. "Say something." He froze, the weight of it in his hands overwhelming. But then he saw Marcus in the crowd, standing off to the side, watching. Jacob stepped up. "I ain't here for me," he said, his voice shaky at first, but growing stronger. "I'm here for my cousin, who got beat down for needing help. I'm here for every one of us who's been told we don't belong. This town's been quiet too long. That ends now." The crowd cheered, a raw, ragged sound that echoed off the courthouse steps. Jacob handed the megaphone back to Aisha, his heart pounding. He'd never spoken like that before, never thought he could, but not everyone was clapping. Across the street, a counter-protest formed, smaller, maybe 20 people, mostly white, waving signs like "Support our cops" and "Stop the lies." Jacob spotted Sheriff Thompson among them, arms crossed, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting the chaos. Next to him stood Bill, the shelter guard, smirking like he'd already won. Aisha nudged Jacob. "They're circling the wagons. Means we've got 'em rattled." That night, Trevor called with a breakthrough. "I got the footage," he whispered, like he was afraid the walls were listening. "Camera wasn't broken. Marianne hid the tape. Shows everything. Bill pushing Marcus. Cook escalating it. I'm sending it to Aisha now. But, man, they're watching me. I might be out of a job soon." Jacob's chest tightened. "You didn't have to do this, Trev." Trevor laughed, a bitter sound. "Yeah, I did. See you on the other side." The video hit Aisha's inbox at midnight. She called Jacob immediately, her voice electric. "This is it. The smoking gun. Shelter's done. Cook's done. We're amending the suit tomorrow, adding conspiracy to cover it up. But listen, they're gonna hit back hard. You ready?" Jacob stared at the brick still sitting on his coffee table. The note's words burned into his mind. "Yeah," he said. "I'm ready." The next morning, all hell broke loose. As Jacob stepped outside, he saw his truck, his lifeline, trashed. Tires slashed, windows smashed, red spray paint scrawled across the hood. N. Lover. His knees buckled, but he didn't fall. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Marcus, eyes wide, holding a bat he'd grabbed from the apartment. "They ain't stopping," Marcus said, his voice raw. Jacob took the bat from him, his hands steady now. "Neither are we." Across town, Aisha was at the clinic when her phone rang. An unknown number. She answered, and a distorted voice rasped through, "Drop the case, or we burn you out." She hung up, her hands trembling, but her resolve ironclad. She called Jacob. "They're coming for us both now. Meet me at the courthouse. We're filing this amendment today, and I'm calling the feds. This ends one way or another." As Jacob drove Marcus to the courthouse in a borrowed car, the radio crackled with breaking news. Greenwood Police Department under scrutiny as new evidence emerges in brutality case. He glanced at Marcus, who managed a faint smile, but then the announcer's voice shifted. Reports of an officer-involved shooting near downtown. Details still unclear. Jacob's blood ran cold. He had a sinking feeling this wasn't over, not by a long shot. All right, let's go even bigger. I'll write Part 4, aiming for around 30,000 characters, surpassing Part 3, while keeping it a seamless continuation of the story. This part will dive into the fallout of the shooting, the federal investigation kicking into gear, and Jacob facing his toughest challenges yet. It'll be packed with drama, new twists, and emotional weight to keep your American audience hooked for that 60-minute narration. Here we go. Part 4. The Storm Breaks. The radio in the borrowed car, a beat-up Honda from Jacob's neighbor, crackled as the announcer's voice cut through the static. Reports of an officer-involved shooting near downtown Greenwood. Details still unclear. Stay tuned for updates. Jacob's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening. Next to him, Marcus sat rigid, staring out the window at the blurred streets rushing by. The courthouse was only 5 minutes away, but it felt like an eternity stretched between that news bulletin and whatever waited for them there. "You think it's connected?" Marcus asked, his voice barely audible over the engine's hum. Jacob didn't answer. He didn't have to. The pit in his stomach told him everything he needed to know. They pulled up to the courthouse just as Aisha's text buzzed through. "Here." Front steps. Now. Jacob parked crookedly, and they bolted out, the morning heat already thick and oppressive. Aisha stood at the top of the steps, her braids loose now, a stack of amended papers clutched in her hand. Her face was a mask of determination, but her eyes betrayed something else. Fear, maybe, or fury. "You hear the news?" she asked as they reached her. Jacob nodded. "Shooting downtown. Any word?" Aisha shook her head. "Not yet, but it's too damn convenient. We're filing this amendment, conspiracy, cover-up, the works, and I've got a contact at the DOJ on speed dial. Feds are coming, Jacob. This just got real." Before he could respond, a roar erupted from down the street. A crowd was forming, bigger than the rally, angrier, spilling out from the direction of downtown. Sirens wailed in the distance, and Jacob caught the glint of news vans pulling up, cameras already rolling. "What the hell's happening?" Marcus muttered, stepping closer to Jacob. Aisha grabbed her phone, scrolling fast. "Twitter's blowing up. Someone's saying a cop shot a kid near the shelter. Black kid, unarmed. People are losing it." Jacob's heart sank. The shelter. Cook. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a match thrown into the powder keg they'd been building. The courthouse doors swung open behind them, and a clerk poked her head out. "You filing or what?" "Judge is in session. Let's move." Aisha shoved the papers at her, barking, "Get these to the docket now." "We're not waiting." The clerk scurried off, and Aisha turned back to Jacob. "We need to know who got shot. If it's tied to Cook or the shelter, this changes everything." She was already dialing her ACLU contact when the crowd surged closer, chants rising, "No justice, no peace." Jacob spotted familiar faces. Rosa from the shelter incident, Mr. Jenkins with a sign, but also new ones, younger, angrier, fists raised. Then the news broke. A reporter from one of the vans shoved a mic toward a bystander, and Jacob caught the words over the chaos. 17-year-old Jamal Carter, shot by Officer Dylan Cook after a traffic stop escalated. Witnesses say he was reaching for his phone, not a weapon. Jacob's knees nearly buckled. Jamal Carter, Mrs. Carter's grandson, the kid who'd brought that casserole to his apartment just days ago. He'd been a junior in high school, quiet, always wearing a hoodie with his school's basketball logo, and now he was dead. Aisha's phone slipped from her hand, clattering on the steps. "Jamal," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I knew him. Oh, God." Marcus grabbed her arm, steadying her, but his own face was ashen. Jacob felt the world tilt, the brick, the threats, the lawsuit, all of it crashing together into this moment. "Cook did this," he said, his voice low and raw. "He's sending a message." Aisha wiped her eyes, picking up her phone. "Then we send one back. This isn't just Marcus's fight anymore. It's all of ours." The crowd swelled, spilling onto the courthouse lawn. Police in riot gear appeared, forming a line, batons tapping against shields. Jacob saw Sheriff Thompson barking orders, his face red with fury. Aisha shoved her way to the front, megaphone in hand now, her voice cutting through the noise. Jamal Carter was murdered today by the same cop who attacked Marcus Williams. The same system that denied him a bed at Greenwood Hope killed him on our streets. We're done being quiet. Filed today is a lawsuit that'll tear this corruption apart. The crowd roared, but the cops pushed forward, tear gas canisters clinking in their hands. Jacob pulled Marcus back as the first canister flew, smoke billowing across the steps. "We gotta get out of here," he shouted, coughing as the sting hit his eyes. They ducked around the side of the building, Aisha right behind, her papers still clutched tight. "Courthouse is locked down," she gasped. "Filing's in, but we're targets now. Feds better hurry." They made it to the Honda, piling in as the chaos grew. Screams, breaking glass, the crack of rubber bullets. Back at Jacob's apartment, they locked the door and turned on the TV. Every channel was live from Greenwood. Riots erupt after fatal police shooting. Footage showed burning cars, protesters clashing with cops, and a shaky clip of Cook at the scene, his face blank as he holstered his gun. Jacob's phone buzzed. "Ethan, the kid with the video." "They're looking for me." Ethan's voice trembled. "Heard Cook's crew asking around. I'm hiding, man, but I'm scared." Jacob gripped the phone. "Stay low. We'll protect you. That video's our leverage." Ethan hung up, and Jacob looked at Aisha. "He's next, if we don't move fast." Aisha was already on her laptop, emailing her DOJ contact. "Officer-involved shooting. Pattern of brutality. Evidence of cover-up at shelter. Greenwood, Georgia. SOS." She hit send, then called her ACLU friend. "Jamal's death's the tipping point. Get here yesterday." The reply was quick. "Feds are mobilizing. Hold tight." But tight was hard to hold when the town was imploding. That night, Jacob's apartment became a war room. Rosa showed up, her eyes red from crying. Jamal had been her nephew's best friend. Mr. Jenkins brought a radio scanner, picking up police chatter. "Suspect in Williams' case. Possible witness. Locate and detain." They were hunting Ethan. Marcus paced, his hands flexing like he wanted to hit something. "This is my fault," he muttered. "If I'd just stayed away." Jacob cut him off. "This is their fault. Cook, Mary Ann, all of them. We're ending it." A knock at the door made them freeze. Jacob grabbed the bat from earlier, peering through the peephole. It was Trevor, soaked in sweat, a USB drive in his hand. "Shelter footage," he panted as Jacob let him in. "Mary Ann tried to destroy it. Caught her shredding files, too. I'm done there. Quit before they fired me." Aisha plugged the drive in, and the screen lit up with crystal-clear video. Bill shoving Marcus, Cook escalating, Mary Ann watching with a smirk. "This ties her to it," Aisha said. "Conspiracy's locked." But the victory was short-lived. The scanner crackled. Suspect located. 5th Street Diner. Ethan. Jacob's stomach dropped. "We gotta get him," he said, grabbing his keys. Aisha stopped him. "Cops'll be there first. We need a plan." Before they could strategize, the TV flashed a new alert. Second shooting reported. Suspect allegedly resisted arrest. Jacob's phone rang, Ethan's number, but no voice, just static and a faint groan before the line went dead. They raced to the diner, the streets a war zone of flashing lights and smoke. Ethan lay in the parking lot, blood pooling under him, a cop standing over him. Reynolds, Cook's partner. "He pulled a knife," Reynolds shouted as Here we go, Part 5, the final chapter. Since this is the conclusion, I'll aim for around 15,000 to 20,000 characters to wrap up the story powerfully while keeping it shorter than Part 4. As it's the finale, not the peak escalation. It'll resolve the major threads: Ethan's fate, the federal investigation, the lawsuit, and Jacob's fight, while delivering emotional payoff and a sense of justice, or its cost, for your American audience. Let's bring it home. Part 5, The Reckoning. The diner parking lot was a blur of red and blue lights, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid sting of tear gas drifting from downtown. Jacob skidded to a stop, the borrowed Honda's tires screeching as he, Aisha, and Marcus spilled out. Ethan lay crumpled on the asphalt, his hoodie soaked dark red, his phone still clutched in his limp hand. Officer Reynolds stood over him, barking into his radio, "Suspect down! Resisted with a knife!" But Jacob saw no knife, just a kid who'd been scared, who'd trusted them with his video, now bleeding out under the neon glow of the diner sign. Aisha lunged forward, screaming, "He didn't have a knife, you bastard!" Marcus grabbed her, pulling her back, as Reynolds swung his flashlight toward them, his face a mask of cold fury. "Back off, now!" he shouted. But Jacob stepped between them, his bat still in hand from the apartment, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "You shot him for nothing. We've got proof. Cook, the shelter, all of it. You're done." Reynolds smirked, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes as more sirens closed in. Paramedics arrived too late. Ethan was gone before they even got him on the stretcher, his last breath a gurgle against the chaos. Jacob felt something break inside him, rage, grief, guilt, but he shoved it down. There'd be time for that later. Right now, they had to survive. Aisha was on her phone, tears streaming as she yelled at her DOJ contact, "2 shootings in 24 hours, Cook and Reynolds. Get here now, or Greenwood burns." Marcus stood frozen, staring at Ethan's body, whispering, "This is on me." Jacob grabbed his cousin's arm. "It's on them. Stay with me." The night spiraled into madness. Police reinforcements swarmed the diner, pushing back a growing crowd. Protesters who'd followed the news of Jamal's death, now chanting Ethan's name too. Jacob, Aisha, and Marcus slipped away in the chaos, back to the apartment, where Trevor, Rosa, and Mr. Jenkins waited, faces grim. The TV blared, "Greenwood in crisis. 2 fatal shootings spark outrage." Aisha plugged Trevor's USB into her laptop, uploading the shelter footage to a cloud drive she'd shared with the feds. "This ends tonight," she said, her voice raw. "They can't bury this." By dawn, the feds arrived, black SUVs rolling into town like a storm front, Department of Justice badges flashing as agents fanned out. The courthouse was cordoned off, the shelter raided, and the police station swarmed. Jacob watched from his shattered living room window as news helicopters buzzed overhead, his phone lighting up with texts from Aisha. "DOJ's got the videos, Ethan's and Trevor's. Arrest warrants out for Cook and Reynolds. Mary Ann's in custody. He sank onto the couch, the bat still in his lap, exhaustion crashing over him like a wave. The next week was a blur of interrogations and headlines. The feds moved fast. Cook and Reynolds were charged with excessive force and manslaughter, Mary Ann with conspiracy and evidence tampering. The shelter's board folded under pressure, admitting they'd pressured staff to screen out certain applicants, code for black and brown faces, under orders from donors tied to Greenwood's wealthiest families. The lawsuit ballooned into a class action case, with dozens of former shelter clients coming forward, their stories mirroring Marcus's. Jacob testified at a preliminary hearing, facing Cook across a courtroom packed with reporters and protesters. Cook's smirk was gone, replaced by a hollow stare as Ethan's video played on a screen, grainy proof of his brutality. Marcus sat beside Jacob, silent but steady, his head high for the first time in years. The judge, a stern black woman from Atlanta, slammed her gavel, denying bail for Cook and Reynolds. "This court will not tolerate a pattern of violence cloaked as justice," she said, her voice echoing. The room erupted, cheers mixing with sobs. But victory came with scars. Ethan's funeral was held a week later, a quiet service in a packed church. Jacob stood with Aisha and Marcus, watching Ethan's mom collapse over the casket, her wails cutting through the hymns. Jamal's family was there too, Mrs. Carter clutching Jacob's hand, whispering, "You fought for them." He nodded, but the words felt hollow. 2 kids were dead, kids he'd promised to protect. The weight of it clung to him like damp earth. The garage fired him the day after the hearing, Hank citing too much heat, but Jacob didn't care. He'd already decided to leave Greenwood. Marcus came with him, the two of them pooling what little they had to rent a place in Atlanta, closer to Emily and a fresh start. Aisha stayed behind, taking a job with the ACLU, vowing to keep the pressure on. "This isn't over," she told Jacob as they hugged goodbye. "Greenwood's just the start." Months later, the case settled. $2 million for Marcus and Jamal's and Ethan's families, the shelter shuttered, and new oversight for the police department. Cook and Reynolds faced trial, their badges stripped, their futures bleak. Mary Ann pleaded guilty, trading a lighter sentence for names of the donors who'd pulled strings. The Gazette ran an exposé, the fall of Greenwood's old guard. But Jacob didn't read it. He was done with that town. On a crisp April morning in 2025, 9 months after that day at the shelter, Jacob sat on his new porch in Atlanta, Marcus beside him, both sipping coffee. Emily, now 8, played in the yard, her laughter a balm to the wounds they carried. "You think it was worth it?" Marcus asked, his voice soft. Jacob watched his daughter chase a butterfly, then nodded. "Yeah, not for us, maybe, but for her, for them." He pointed to the kids down the street, black and brown and white, playing together like it was nothing. The fight had cost them, Ethan, Jamal, pieces of themselves, but it had cracked something open too. Greenwood wasn't fixed, but it was exposed, its shadows shrinking under the light they'd forced upon it. Jacob leaned back, closing his eyes, the ember inside him finally at rest. They'd won, not everything, but enough.